The Arc Ensemble musicians, who are the artists of the Royal Conservatory of Music in Canada, are considered among Canada's leading cultural ambassadors. Its 20-year history of excellent concerts and superbly produced recordings documents the ensemble's focus on the research and rediscovery of music suppressed and marginalized under the 20th century's repressive regimes. Emigres to Israel reclaimed noteworthy works by three composers who escaped Europe under Nazi domination to find a haven in Palestine. And I'm joined today by the artistic director of the Arc Ensemble, Simon Weinberg. So welcome, Simon. It's lovely to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So I wanted to see if I could get you to talk a little bit about the history of the Arc Ensemble generally and its involvement with rediscovering and reclaiming music from suppressed composers. Was the group founded for this purpose, or did this develop over time?
Um, it's, I was asked to come in to start an in-house ensemble for the Royal Conservatory, which is a great idea, and it's something that probably should be adopted by um, all sorts of other conservatories and music departments. And the idea was that the ensemble would showcase the professors at the institution and would perform together and tour and record and act as ambassadors basically for the conservatory. And so I did that. I started that off, and when I was asked to put this together, uh, my initial reaction was, how do we do something that sets this ensemble apart? And being a chamber group, I thought, we can't really go in and start doing, Mozart clarinet quintets and Dvorak piano quintets, because there's several gorillas in the room that we'd be competing with, and quite honestly, I didn't really see the logic of duplicating stuff that's already been duplicated many hundreds of times. And so we started to explore undiscovered repertoire, or things that were on the margins, and gradually I moved to composers who had been marginalized for reasons other than fashionability, or because they'd been squeezed apart because they were poor self-promoters, whatever the usual cases are. And I thought, well, what better reason to explore unknown composers than those who were purposely pushed aside and whose careers were ruined, not because of their own lack of ambition or inability to promote themselves, but because they were marginalized on purpose by other people. And so that was the thrust. And I think exploring those composers who were really unfairly dismissed from the industry is, in a way, to me anyway, it seems like the best use of our time.
Yes. And yes, so Arc is, of course, a very respected ensemble, and you've been the artistic director for a long time, and very much sort of guiding the path for your work, which includes a number of recordings, such as such as the Paul Ben clarinet quintet on Chandos, and and I know that the group has earned several awards and honors over the lifetime of the ensemble. And just one question for you, like, are you primarily a scholar and musicologist, or what is also your primary instrument, or are you also like a musician that's also?
I'm what is known as a recovering guitarist.
Okay,
I had a career as a classical guitarist, and then one thing or another, my hands started to do things that were well, they didn't lend themselves to playing the guitar. There was arthritis, and there was so I mean, my background had been as in musicology as well. I'd done a lot of exploration of unknown guitar repertoire, so I was kind of primed to do something similar, but I suppose in a bigger frame.
Okay, I see. Now, now regarding your research on artists in exile in general, every as we have both stated, the Arc Ensemble performs music by many composers who fled the Nazi regime and established new lives in other countries, as of course with this Emigrates to Israel program that the library is presenting. But your outlook is very wide, and you have focused actually on the careers of composers following the Holocaust era, as with your recent focus on Walter Kaufmann.
Mhm.
Also, and I also believe Weinberg, who first fled the Nazis and then was repressed and arrested in the Soviet Union.
Right. Yep.
So, yeah, would you mind just to talk about talk
Yeah,
a little bit
I
about
think,
the focus as well?
I think when people often when they talk about the Arc Ensemble, they refer to it in terms of the Holocaust, which um, is right in a way, but wrong in another. And because um, composers who were murdered during the Holocaust, many of them have been fairly well explored. Um, the those who survived or who left Germany in the 30s and came to Israel or to the United States or to England, they have been passed over because I suppose in a sense that the fact that they didn't die made their lives in a way less noteworthy. So we've looked at composers who essentially whose careers were really ruined by the fact that they couldn't carry on as they had been in Germany. And if they had been in Germany and the Nazis hadn't risen to power, they would probably have enjoyed really solid careers. And I'm sure Walter Kaufmann is one of them. And Kaufmann ended up in India for 12 years and then went to Indiana finally, after an 8-year stay in Winnipeg, of all places, where he started the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. Was wondered about the effect that moving from the humidity of Bombay to the freezing cold of Winnipeg would have done to him. But and then of course we recently looked at Klebanov, Dmitry Klebanov, who was a Ukrainian and a Ukrainian nationalist. He happened to be Jewish, but there was no synagogue in Kharkiv where he lived, and so he saw himself as Jewish, and he definitely saw himself as a Ukrainian and a Ukrainian nationalist. And so that came out last year, and then lo and behold, Putin invades Ukraine, or let's say he continues his invasion of Ukraine, which had started in 2014, and suddenly this recording became a thing, and I got all sorts of invitations from broadcasters to talk about Klebanov and all sorts of requests for the music from colleagues who wanted to perform it and use it for fundraising purposes, etc. So there was Klebanov, who suffered under Stalin, and whose career was essentially ruined under Stalin, but had a long and fairly fruitful life, and who has suddenly become more relevant again. So each one of these composers has a really different and compelling story, and I think that's what keeps kind of moving me into these composers, because each one of them is so different, and every story is absolutely riveting, but totally different from the one before.
No, that's very true. Yeah, they all had such different paths, and yeah, one composer who was on the program is actually a female composer by the name of Verdina Schlansky, and of course, we are all familiar with a number of significant composers who fled repression in Europe during the period from 1933 to 1945, and yeah, I was and until I heard and saw the program that you presented, I had never actually heard of Ferdina Schlansky. And this sort of reminds us that relatively few women are as of yet known in this context. And I was just wondering if you could please talk about her career, not only as a composer, but as a writer, critic, and educator, and also pianist.
Well, she was a pretty amazing figure, and is um, her music is tricky. It's very cerebral, and that's why the piece that we picked for this program is not one of her larger and more complicated pieces. But she wrote a prize-winning string quartet, won a Bartok Prize, I think in the 40s, and then she finally ended up in Israel, and she had a very um, she was I think a what you would call a tricky personality, and that's not because she was a woman. It was because she had a terribly tricky personality. And,
Okay.
because God knows that there are enough impossible men in the music
That's
industry.
true. We know a lot of difficult personalities as
But
composers. It's kind of part of the
she
job description. Yeah.
when she arrived in Israel, like, and there were many composers like this who resisted the idea of creating a new language. I mean, the thing with Ben Haim, he arrived and he realized immediately that he was in a new context, and he made a decision to leave um, the music that he had composed in Europe behind, and to evolve something that was new. And when he wrote the clarinet quintet, he was very pleased with what he had done, because it was an amalgamation and a mixture of styles and accents, really. And
Hmm.
he glued them all together in such a way that it made musical and dramatic sense, and it didn't um, it didn't play down to the audience. It used all these things in a very grown up and sophisticated kind of way, and the end result is wonderful. And Shlonsky, the piece that we used, is actually a piece that she was kind of fairly dismissive of, this horror.
Hmm.
And she basically said she wrote it for the money. It's a lovely piece, but she was kind of fairly dismissive of it because it wasn't serious, and she was quite adamant that the music she was going to compose was not going to make um, it was not going to make any apologies to the fact that she had moved from Europe to mandated Palestine, what became Israel. And she made absolutely no bones about that. And Kozaditsa was pretty much the same. He said, I write what I write, and like it or not. that
Okay.
was that was their attitude.
Yeah. Now, it was, yeah, like in doing research on Shlonsky, she actually wrote in a, yeah, in a wide variety of genres.
Yep.
She wrote chamber music, symphony, and things like this. But Zalitzer, not so much. Is that it? Yeah, like he wasn't so prolific, I guess it seems like.
There's actually quite a lot of surviving music by him, and of course, none of it is known. I mean, most people, the first thing they do is they have trouble with his name, and
Yes, which I probably butchered just now. I wasn't sure.
and apparently the
Zalutzer.
correct pronunciation is Kozelitzer.
Krzelitzer. Okay, thank you,
Kozelitzer, yeah.
Krzelitzer. Thank
But of
you.
course, people come as Cheretzer, well, which they have real problems with the name, which is a problem when you want to program something, because if people cannot tell their friends and neighbors who's on the program, because A, it's obscure, and B, even if it wasn't obscure, they wouldn't be able to pronounce it. You have a bit of a problem. But there is actually quite a lot of Kozelitz's of his music in Israel, and a lot that's worthy of further exploration, I think. This was
Okay.
for us, a bit of an exploration, because neither Shlonsky nor Kozelitzer had ever been on any of our programs, and we'd never looked at any of their work. So
Really? Okay.
yeah,
Because both like pieces, yeah, like we're so contrasting yet yeah, like both pieces were just sort of so filled with bravura. It was really wonderful to hear these. It was really wonderful for me to discover these two works, and yeah, like as soon as I heard them, I immediately looked up who these two composers were because I didn't
mhm,
know them
mhm.
before. So
I think that for me, and this is a very much a personal thing. I think in listening to music now, we listen for um, satisfaction rather than out of curiosity. You know, but
Mhm.
when we hear a piece that we know, we immediately respond to it. Oh, well, I know this, and oh, he's doing it that way, and he's wow, he took a pause there and he stretched that phrase, and he played that a little louder than Radulupu does. So we approach it all in terms of a familiarity and a reference, whereas 100 years ago, people listened to everything in a state of curiosity, and how is this going to pan out? And wow, this sounds interesting. So it was a journey rather than um, a, a commute, as it were, where
Of
everything
course,
you
yeah.
looked out the window and you recognized everything. This was a journey where you looked out the window and you thought, wow, this is new. Um, and and I love that. I mean, I love the idea of an audience experience something for the very first time and knowing that they've never heard a note of it before. That's a real thrill for me.
Yeah, no, it's really thrilling, and yeah, like it's funny. The older you get as a musician or like as a music lover, you get like uh, it becomes hard to discover newer pieces, newer composers, newer works, and things of this nature. So it was really such a pleasure to sort of discover these two composers, and and it was funny in reading about these two composers that got me thinking about various American composers and performers who came to the library around the same time, and it got me thinking about the history of the library's concerts. And I know that you have done research on several important artists connected with our history at the Library of Congress, including Adolf Busch and Rudolf Serkin. In 1933, shortly after they left Germany,
Yep.
they actually appeared a number of times at the library and would draw in a circle of artists, including other emigres. And I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about Busch and Serkin in this context.
Wow, I wasn't expecting a question about Bush and Serkin, but um, yeah, we did quite a while ago. We did a little video of it was we used the Bush String Sextet, and it covered a period of Bush and the Bush Quartet arriving in Berlin in 1933, and then they're experiencing the whole Kristall. Actually, 1930. No, it was 1933. It was 1933, and they're watching, the sort of activity of SS and Jews being made to clean sidewalks and what have you, and they decided that they were not going to tour Germany anymore, and
Hmm.
Bush was just going to go back, stay in Switzerland where he lived, and then finally, of course, he having boycotted Germany, he then boycotted Italy, ended up with going to England for some concerts, and then finally, settled in the States. And he was one of the few um, who who made that move. And Hitler really um, admired his playing. I mean, he referred to him as unser deutscher Geiger, our German violinist, because all the great fiddle players at the time were largely, most of them were Jewish, and here was this great German fiddle player, and he did the wrong thing, and told the authorities that he wasn't going to play, and they tried to bribe him, and he gave them the middle finger and just went to the States, um, and and then built Marlborough and all the great things that he did there. I mean, but that experience, and I'm kind of dwelling on that because it was that really, I think, that kind of shortened his life.
Hmm.
Um, because I think had been able to continue without those stresses, which he really felt deeply. I mean, he felt humiliated as a man and as a German by the Nazi regime. He felt it in a really deep and personal way. so I think what he did by coming to the States, I mean, that kind of revived him musically. Although I don't think he ever had the kind of the freedom and the he certainly really stopped composing by the time he'd reached the States, or anyway eased up considerably. So I mean, the concerts that he did for you guys, I mean, they are really, really important, in the sense that it's that it's that flowering of German performance art at its finest, and exporting it to the new world. He refused to play anything. He refused to play the kind of flashy
showpieces. He was more about he was more of a traditionalist, playing Brahms and Beethoven.
Absolutely, he refused to do the show-off pieces, the ones that would kind of get the easy applause. He was absolutely uninterested in that. He was a very, very serious musician. I think even probably more serious than than any of the sort of local sort of serious fiddle players.
Yeah, just because I have not heard so much of his music, but I remember like just sort of like perusing through the stacks at the library, and I came across his piano quartet that I think is actually dedicated to the founder of the concert series, Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge. And I'm just curious, how would you describe his music actually? Was it in the same vein as kind of Korngold, or like how would you describe how would you describe Bush's music actually, if you had to kind of compare it to someone or to
it's incredibly. I mean, he would compose anywhere. I think he might even be one of those composers who could sort of just sit down and write, even if there was other stuff going on, even if there was other music going on. He had that kind of focus. He would write on trains. He would write in hotel rooms, and he would write incredibly quickly. And so the quality of the music varies, but at its best, it's just wonderful. And his sense, his harmonic sense, and his ability to write counterpoint is just extraordinary, just extraordinary. We recorded the string sextet, and it's a wonderful piece. It really is a wonderful piece.
I don't know it. I'll have to go and find this recording then. Definitely. Well, Simon, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It's really been it's been a revelation to hear your insights about the program and hear your insights about these composers. And I hope to be able to present you in person sometime if you're ever in Washington.
We'd love to do it. Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Yeah, great to meet you.